The sunlight was pouring through the large plate glass windows of the small bookstore, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny, suspended stars. It was one of those rare, perfect afternoons in the city where the temperature was just right, and the light made everything look golden and cinematic. Inside, the air smelled of old paper, vanilla beans, and the faint, sweet scent of coffee brewing in the corner. The shop, usually a quiet sanctuary for readers, was buzzing with low, electric hum. Today was not an ordinary day. Today, Keanu Reeves was sitting at a large metal table near the back, waiting to sign copies of his new book. People had lined up hours before the event even started. The queue snaked around the tall, metal shelving units, past the travel section, and curled around the displays of bestsellers near the entrance. It was a diverse crowd, ranging from teenagers wearing vintage band t-shirts to elderly couples who had probably been watching his movies for decades. Everyone was whispering, excited but tried to keep their voices down out of respect for the quiet nature of the shop. There was a collective feeling of disbelief that a movie star of his caliber was sitting in such an intimate, accessible setting. At the signing table, Keanu looked tired but peaceful. He was dressed simply in a dark blazer over a clean white t-shirt, looking more like a weary traveler than a Hollywood icon. He had a small glass of water to his right and a tall stack of his books to his left. Every time a fan stepped up to him, he put his full attention on them. He didn't just scribble his name and push the book away. He looked them in the eyes. He smiled. He asked how they were doing. When a young girl handed him a drawing she had made him, he held it up like it was a precious piece of art, showing it to the staff sitting nearby before carefully folding it and placing it in his pocket. The crowd watching this let out a collective, "Ah," their hearts warming at his kindness. Deep in the line, standing near the back of the shop by the philosophy section, stood a woman named Martha. She was probably in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a loose bun and wearing a floral cardigan that looked like it had been knitted years ago. While everyone else was chatting, checking their phones, or craning their necks to get a glimpse of the star, Martha was perfectly still. She held no book in her hands. Her purse was clutched tightly against her chest with both hands, her knuckles white from the pressure. Her eyes were fixed on the back of the room, staring intensely at the man sitting at the metal table. She wasn't looking at him with a starstruck admiration of the others. Her gaze was heavy, filled with a confusing mix of desperation and something that looked like deep, unresolved anger. The line moved slowly, shuffling forward on the polished concrete floor. As people got closer to the front, the nervous energy spiked. A young man in front of Martha was vibrating with excitement, practicing what he was going to say under his breath. He turned to Martha at one point, offering a friendly smile. "Pretty crazy, right? I never thought I'd see him in person," the young man said. Martha didn't blink. She didn't return the smile. She just kept staring past him, her eyes unblinking and glassy. The young man awkwardly turned back around, deciding to leave her alone. There was something about her that made him want to step back. She felt like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap at the slightest touch. Minutes ticked by. The stack of books on Keanu's table was slowly shrinking, but the line remained long. The afternoon sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the room. The mood was generally light, filled with laughter and the sound of pages turning. Then Martha moved up a few spots. She was now close enough to hear Keanu's voice. It was low and soft, a comforting baritone that drifted over the noise of the shop. When she heard him laugh at something a fan said, Martha flinched violently. It was a small reaction, but it happened. She closed her eyes for a second, her face crumpling in pain, as if the sound of his laugh had physically hurt her. The person directly in front of her, a woman holding a camera, stepped up to the table. After getting her signature and a quick photo, she moved away. There was no one left between Martha and the table. The security guard, a tall man standing off to the side, glanced at Martha. He noticed she didn't have a book to be signed. He took a half step forward, opening his mouth to ask if she was waiting for someone or if she needed help. But he paused. He saw the look on her face. He hesitated, giving her the benefit of the doubt, assuming she was just a grandmotherly figure who was overwhelmed or perhaps confused about how the line worked. Martha walked forward. Her steps were heavy, dragging slightly against the floor. She didn't walk with the excited bounce of fan. She walked with the slow, deliberate pace of someone marching toward a difficult duty. The crowd around her quieted down. It wasn't deliberate silence, but natural reaction to the strange energy she was emitting. People felt it. They stopped talking. They stopped taking pictures. They watched her. She reached the metal table. Keanu was finishing a note in a book for the previous person. He looked up, his trademark gentle smile already forming on his lips. He expected to see another happy fan. Instead, he saw Martha. He saw the tears welling in her eyes and the terrifying intensity of her stare. His smile faltered just a fraction, turning into a look of polite concern. "Hello," Keanu said softly. He started to reach out, perhaps to shake her hand or to offer comfort. "It is good to—" He didn't finish the sentence. Martha didn't say a word. She didn't ask for an autograph. She didn't say she loved his movies. She let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob, a raw noise of pure emotion. Then, with a speed that shocked everyone, she raised her right hand. The hand that had been clutching her purse flew through the air. The slap connected hard against his cheek. The sound was crisp and loud, cutting through the humid air of the bookstore like a sharp crack of thunder. It silenced the room instantly. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to stop. The rustle of clothes ceased. Even the traffic noise from outside the glass windows seemed to vanish. Keanu's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. His glasses askew, he sat there frozen for a split second. The crowd was paralyzed. Hundreds of eyes went wide. Mouths dropped open. No one could believe what had just happened. The security guard froze, his hand hovering near his radio, stunned by the audacity and the suddenness of the violence. In that moment, the world seemed to stop spinning, waiting to see what would happen next. The silence was deafening. For a moment that felt like an eternity, nobody in the bookstore moved. The sound of the slap seemed to hang in the air, vibrating against the glass windows and the high ceiling. It was a shocking, raw noise that silenced the low hum of conversation and the rustle of pages. The entire room was trapped in a bubble of disbelief. People stood with their mouths slightly open, their eyes wide and fixed on the front of the store. It was a kind of silence that feels heavy, pressing down on everyone's chests, making it hard to breathe. The security guard, who had been leaning against a shelf just moments before, was now frozen mid-step. His hand was hovering over his radio, his brain trying to process what his eyes had just seen. A fan had just struck one of the most famous actors in the world, and the violence that was jarring in such a peaceful place. Keanu sat there for a second, his head still turned slightly to the side from the impact. Slowly, very slowly, he turned his face back to look at the woman standing in front of him. There was a red mark beginning to bloom on his cheek, stark against his skin. He blinked once, twice. A normal person in this situation might have shouted, might have stood up and knocked the chair over, or might have immediately looked for security to drag the attacker away. But Keanu did none of those things. He didn't cover his face. He didn't retreat. He didn't look at her with anger or hatred. Instead, his expression was one of pure, unfiltered confusion mixed with strange, soft concern. He looked at her not as an attacker, but as a human being who was clearly in some kind of distress. Martha was still standing there, her arm hanging loosely by her side now, her palm stinging from the contact. The anger that had fueled her sudden movement had evaporated the instant her hand touched his face. In its place, a look of absolute horror washed over her features. It was as if she had just woken up from a terrifying dream and realized where she was. Her eyes, which had been so hard and intense just seconds ago, now filled with tears. They spilled over, tracking hot lines down her wrinkled cheeks. She looked at her own hand as if it belonged to a stranger, trembling violently. She looked back at Keanu, her face crumpling, her lips quivering as she tried to form words, but could only make small, choked, gasping sounds. The crowd began to murmur. The spell was breaking slightly, and people were starting to react. A few teenagers near the front pulled out their phones, holding them up to record the aftermath. Someone whispered, "Did she really just slap him?" Another voice, harsher, said, "Get her out of here." The atmosphere was shifting from shock to a potential mob mentality. The energy in the room was turning sour. People were protective of the actor. They wanted to see justice served. They wanted to see this woman who had ruined the nice afternoon removed. The security guard finally shook off his paralysis. He stepped forward, his large frame blocking the sun from a window. He reached out to grab Martha's arm, his face stern. "Ma'am," he said, his voice loud and commanding in the quiet shop. "You need to step back. You need to come with me." He lunged for her, ready to escort her out the door. But before his fingers could touch the fabric of her floral cardigan, a hand went up. "Stop." It wasn't a shout. It was a single word, spoken firmly but quietly. Keanu had stood up. He pushed his chair back, the metal legs scraping softly against the concrete floor. He raised a hand toward the security guard, palm out. The guard stopped instantly, confused, looking between the actor and the old woman. Keanu shook his head slightly, a small movement that told the guard to stand down. The guard hesitated, then slowly lowered his hands, taking a step back into the shadows, but he stayed alert, his muscles tense. Keanu then did something that nobody expected. He walked around the metal table. He stepped out from behind the safety of the barrier, closing the distance between himself and Martha. The crowd held its breath again. Was he going to yell at her? Was he going to tell her to leave himself? He stopped just a foot away from her. Up close, he was much taller than her. He could have intimidated her easily, but he stood with his shoulders relaxed, his hands open and visible at his sides. Martha was swaying now. The adrenaline that had kept her on her feet was crashing, leaving her weak and dizzy. She let out a sob, a heart-wrenching sound that seemed too big for her small body. Her knees buckled, and she started to fall forward. It wasn't a fake fall. It was a total collapse of a person who had reached their limit. Keanu moved faster than anyone thought he could. He stepped in and caught her. He didn't push her away. He didn't let her drop to the hard floor. He grabbed her by her elbows, steadying her, taking her weight against his chest. He held her up like she was something precious, not a person who had just struck him. "Hey," he said. His voice was incredibly gentle, a deep rumble that seemed to calm the air around them. "Hey, take it easy. It's okay." Martha was weeping openly now, her face buried in her hands, her body shaking against his. She was mumbling things that didn't make sense, fragments of sentences about mistakes, and seeing things that weren't there. The people watching were completely bewildered. The phones were still recording, capturing the surreal moment where the victim of an assault was comforting the attacker. "Please," she choked out, her voice muffled by her hands. I thought, oh, God, I'm so sorry." Keanu didn't let go. He kept a firm grip on her arms, making sure she didn't slide to the ground. He leaned down slightly, trying to catch her eyes, trying to ground her. "Look at me," he said softly. "Just breathe. Take a breath." He signaled to one of the bookstore staff who was standing nearby, looking terrified. He pointed to a chair that was empty near the signing table. The staff member scrambled to grab it, dragging it over. Keanu guided Martha toward the chair, walking slowly with her, supporting her every step of the way. He didn't care about the red mark on his face. He didn't care about the hundreds of eyes watching his every move. His entire focus was on this trembling, broken woman who had slapped him in front of everyone. As he sat her down in the chair, he crouched in front of her. He was looking up at her now, a position of submission and care. He rested his hands on his knees, waiting for her breathing to slow down. The room was so quiet you could hear the antique clock ticking on the far wall. The tension was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer about anger or violence. It was about a mystery. Why was he being so kind? What had just happened? Martha lowered her hands, revealing a face destroyed by grief. She looked at Keanu, her eyes blurry with tears, and saw no judgment there. She saw only patience. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, looking ashamed. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, her voice cracking. Keanu just nodded, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "Don't worry about that right now," he said. "Are you hurt? Did you fall?" The question was so unexpected, so backwards, that it made Martha sob even harder. The man she had hit was asking if she was okay. The crowd watched in stunned silence, the narrative of the afternoon completely rewritten. They weren't witnessing a scandal anymore. They were witnessing a moment of profound grace that nobody would ever forget. The silence in the bookstore stretched on, thick and heavy. It wasn't the quiet of a library where people are respectfully hushed. It was the tense, still silence of a room holding its breath, waiting for the next drop of rain. The only movement came from Martha, whose shoulders shook with deep, racking sobs. She sat hunched in the chair, looking small and fragile, like a bird with a broken wing. Keanu remained crouched in front of her, his position one of submission and care. He didn't stand up to tower over her. He stayed down on one knee, looking up into her tear-streaked face, ignoring the throbbing red mark on his own cheek. A young staff member, a girl with bright blue hair and a terrified expression, hesitantly stepped forward. She held a bottle of water in her hand, extending it toward Keanu like a peace offering. He took it without looking away from Martha. He twisted the cap off with a soft snap and held the bottle out to her. "Here," he said, his voice low and gravelly, barely above a whisper. "Just a small sip. It will help." Martha's hands were trembling so violently that she couldn't grasp the plastic bottle. Her fingers just slipped against the condensation on the surface. Seeing this, Keanu didn't pull away. He brought the bottle closer to her lips and steadied it with his own hand, guiding her so she could drink. She took a tiny, hesitant gulp, the water spilling slightly down her chin. He fished a handkerchief from his pocket, white cotton, simple, and dabbed it away gently. It was such a domestic, caring act, performed by a stranger she had just assaulted, that the people watching felt a lump form in their own throats. Martha took a deep, shuddering breath and looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time, the fog in her eyes seemed to clear slightly. She saw the kindness there, but she also saw the reality. She saw that this was not her son. The realization hit her like a physical blow, and she let out a moan of pure heartbreak. "He looks just like you," she whispered, her voice cracking and dry. Keanu leaned in a little closer, tilting his head to hear her. "Who does?" he asked gently. "My boy, my David." She spoke the name like it was a prayer and a curse all at once. She gripped the arms of the chair, her knuckles turning white again. "He died 6 months ago. A car accident. Just gone. 1 minute he was there, calling me to ask about dinner, and the next, the police were at my window." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. The confusion began to lift, replaced by a dawning understanding. The anger that had been bubbling under the surface evaporated instantly. These weren't the actions of a crazy stalker or a hateful person. This was a mother drowning in grief. Martha continued, her words tumbling out fast now, as if she had been holding them in for too long. "I saw you sitting there from across the room. The hair, the nose, the way you smile when people talk to you. It was him. For a second, I swear it was him sitting there." She reached out a trembling hand toward Keanu's face, but stopped inches away, remembering what she had done. She pulled her hand back and hid it in her lap. "I think I went a little crazy," she sobbed. "My brain just snapped. I thought maybe if I slapped him, if I hurt him, he would wake up. Or maybe I was just so mad at the universe for taking him and leaving you behind. It felt like a cruel joke. Why do you get to sit here and smile, and my boy is in the ground?" The room was deadly silent now. You could hear the traffic light changing color outside the glass windows, a faint ding-dong that echoed in the quiet. Every single person in that line was thinking about their own mothers, their own sons, their own losses. The cameras were still recording, but the atmosphere had completely changed. No one was looking for a viral moment of drama anymore. They were witnessing a private, devastating tragedy playing out in public. Keanu listened to every word. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offend himself. He didn't say, "It wasn't me." He just let her pour her pain out. He knew about loss. It was a heavy coat he had worn in the past, one that never truly leave your shoulders. He looked at this woman, this stranger who had struck him, and he didn't see a villain. He saw a fellow traveler through the dark woods of grief. When she finished speaking, she slumped forward, exhausted by the outburst. "I'm so sorry," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just missed him so much. It hurts so much." Keanu took a deep breath. He reached out and very gently placed a hand on her knee. It was a grounding touch, a way of saying, "I am here, I am real, and I am not angry." "It's okay," he said, and he meant it. I understand. He paused, looking for the right words. Words that wouldn't sound hollow or like something from a script. I am not him. I wish I could bring him back for you. I know I can't. But I am real, and I'm right here. You didn't wake him up, and that's a terrible thing to carry. But you didn't hurt me, not really. I'm okay. Martha looked up, her eyes searching his face for any sign of lie. She found none. She saw a deep well of sympathy in his dark eyes. She started to cry again, but this time it was softer, a release rather than an explosion of rage. I just wanted him to be real, she wept. I just wanted to touch him one last time. Keanu stayed there, crouching on the hard floor, ignoring the discomfort in his leg. He signaled to the security guard again, but this time he wasn't telling him to back off. He whispered something to the staff member nearby. A moment later, the manager brought over a chair and placed it behind Keanu. He sat down so he was eye level with Martha, not hovering above her. Tell me about him, Keanu said softly. Martha blinked, surprised. What? Tell me about David. What was he like? It was a simple question, but it shattered the last of Martha's defenses. She began to talk, haltingly at first, then with more flow. She talked about how David loved old motorcycles, how he had a gap-toothed smile that he was self-conscious about, how he always burned the toast, but loved cooking breakfast on Sundays. As she spoke, the crowd faded into the background. It became just two people in a circle of light. The red mark on Keanu's cheek was still there, a vivid testament to the start of this conversation, but now it looked like a badge of empathy rather than a wound of violence. The people watching realized they weren't just seeing a movie star. They were seeing a man who understood that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who are hurting the most themselves. As Martha finished speaking, the heavy silence that had settled over the bookstore shifted. It was no longer a silence of shock or confusion, but a sacred quietness, like a feeling inside a church or a library late at night. She had poured out the contents of her broken heart, laying her grief on the table between them. She looked exhausted, the adrenaline that had fueled her outburst completely drained from her body. She sat slumped in the chair, her hands resting loosely in her lap, looking at Keanu with eyes that were red and swollen, but clearer than they had been when she first walked in. Keanu listened until there were no more words left in her. He nodded slowly, processing everything she had said about David, about the motorcycles, about the burnt toast. He didn't offer cliches or tell her that time heals all wounds, because he knew that wasn't always true. He just sat with her in the mess of her emotions, letting her know she wasn't alone. He sounded like he was a wonderful person, Keanu said finally. His voice was steady, a calm anchor in the storm of her feelings. Thank you for telling me about him. Keeping his memory alive like that, it matters. It keeps him here with us. Martha let out a long, shaky breath. It was the first time she had breathed properly since she walked into the shop. I just miss him so much, she whispered. Some days it's hard to even get out of bed. I saw you, and for a second I was just so angry that you were there, and he wasn't. It wasn't fair. I'm so sorry I hit you. I've never hit anyone in my life. Keanu reached up and gently touched his cheek. The red mark was still visible, a stark contrast against the skin, but he smiled softly. It's okay, he reassured her. Really, I've been through bumps and bruises before. This one will heal. But knowing you're carrying this kind of pain, that hurts much more than a slap ever could. You don't need to carry it all by yourself. Not right now. He turned slightly in his chair and reached for the stack of books on the table. He took the top copy, the one with the glossy cover and the crisp pages. He opened it to the title page. The crowd watched with bated breath, hundreds of eyes fixed on his hands. He uncapped his permanent marker, the sound sharp in the quiet room. He paused for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. He wasn't just signing his name. He was thinking about David, about the mother who missed him, and about the strange, tragic connection that had brought them together. He wrote slowly, deliberately. When he finished, he capped the marker and closed the book. He held it out to Martha with both hands, presenting it to her not as a celebrity giving a gift to a fan, but as one human being offering comfort to another. Martha hesitated. She looked at the book, then up at him. I didn't buy anything, she said weakly. I don't have any money. It's yours, Keanu said, his voice firm but kind. He pushed the book gently toward her hands. Please, take it. She took the book. It was heavy in her hands. She opened the cover to see what he had written. In his neat, legible handwriting, it read, Asterisk to your son David, who lives on in your heart. You are a strong mother. With deepest sympathy, Keanu. Asterisk. Martha stared at the words. She traced the letters with her thumb, her lip trembling violently. She looked up at him, a fresh wave of tears coming. But these were different. They weren't tears of madness or rage. They were tears of gratitude. Thank you, she choked out. Thank you. You didn't have to do this. Not after what I did. Keanu reached out and squeezed her shoulder. We all have our battles, he said simply. Just take care of yourself, okay? David would want that. At that moment, a staff member from the shop, a young woman with glasses who had been watching from a respectful distance, stepped forward. She seemed hesitant to interrupt, but she knew the event had to move forward. She walked over to Martha's side and placed a hand gently on her back. Ma'am, the staff member said softly, I have a chair in the back office where you can sit for a bit. There's some water and some cookies. You can rest as long as you need. I can help you get to your car when you're ready. Martha looked at the young woman, then back at Keanu. She realized her time in the spotlight was over. She clutched the book against her chest like a shield. She nodded slowly, struggling to stand up. Keanu immediately rose from his chair and offered her his arm. She took it, leaning heavily on him as she found her footing. He walked her the 2 steps to the aisle where the staff member was waiting. As she let go of his arm to take the staff member's hand, she turned back one last time. I'm so sorry, she said again, her eyes pleading for forgiveness one final time. Keanu just smiled, a warm, genuine expression that reached his eyes. Go rest, he said. Peace be with you. Martha allowed herself to be led away, disappearing through the glass doors of the office at the back of the store. The crowd watched her go. There was no whispering, no pointing, just a collective sense of somber respect. The situation could have ended in chaos, with police sirens and a viral scandal. Instead, it ended with an old woman holding a signed book, feeling a little less alone in the world. Keanu stood there for a moment, watching the space where she had been. He let out a long exhale, rolling his shoulders slightly as if releasing the tension of the last 20 minutes. He turned back to the table and sat down on his metal chair. He picked up his water bottle and took a drink. The red mark on his face was still there, a silent testament to the strange events of the afternoon. He looked at the long line of people stretching to the back of the store. He didn't look angry or annoyed at the delay. He looked at them with the same patient, open expression he had had before the slap. Sorry about that, everyone, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the shop now that the murmuring had died down. Life gets complicated sometimes. Who's next? The tension in the room finally broke. A few people let out nervous laughs, but it was a relief to laugh. The energy of the line had completely transformed. Before, people were excited to meet a movie star. Now, they felt like they were in the presence of someone truly special, not because of his films, but because of his character. As the next person stepped up to the table, a tall young man wearing a flannel shirt, he didn't just hand over a book for an autograph. He paused, looked Keanu in the eye, and said quietly, "That was really decent of you, man. Really decent." Keanu accepted the book, opened it to the title page, and smiled. "Thanks," he said. "Let's keep going." The scratching of his pen on paper resumed, a rhythmic, comforting sound that signaled that normal life had returned, but somehow everything was a little different than before. The sunlight continued to stream through the windows, illuminating the dust motes, but the room felt warmer now, filled with quiet understanding and compassion that everyone they would carry with them when they left the shop. The rhythm of the scratching pen against paper became the heartbeat of the room again. Scritch, scratch, slide. It was a simple sound, but after the chaos of the previous half hour, it was the most reassuring noise in the world. The line of people continued to move forward, inch by inch, but the entire atmosphere of the event had undergone a massive transformation. Before, the air was thick with excitement, the electric buzz of fans eager to meet a movie star, to get a piece of his fame on a piece of paper. Now, The air felt heavier, weighted with a newfound respect and a quiet contemplation. People weren't just looking at Keanu Reeves, the actor, anymore. They were looking at Keanu Reeves, the man. They saw the red mark on his cheek, which was now fading into a faint pink blush, but they didn't see a victim. They saw someone who had absorbed a blow, meant for a ghost, and responded with patience. As each person stepped up to the metal table, the interactions changed dramatically. There were fewer screams, fewer requests for selfies with goofy faces. Instead, people approached him with a gentle reverence. A young man, probably a college student wearing a hoodie and backwards cap, stepped up to the table. He placed his book down gently. He looked at Keanu, then at the cheek, and back at Keanu's eyes. I saw what happened, the young man said, his voice sounding a bit shaky. He cleared his throat. I just think, that was really cool. How you handled that. It was decent, really decent. Keanu looked up from the book. He didn't brag or brush it off. He just offered a modest, tired smile. Thank you, he said softly. She was hurting. We just have to look out for each other, you know? The young man nodded, seemingly stunned by the simplicity of the answer. He took his book and walked away, holding it like it was more valuable now than when he bought it. The sun outside the large glass windows had begun its descent, casting long, golden shadows across the polished concrete floor. The light bathed the bookstore in a warm, orange glow, making the dust motes look like floating embers. As the line dwindled, the fatigue started to show on Keanu's face. It had been a long day, even before the unexpected drama. He sat up straighter, rolling his neck slightly to work out a kink, but he never stopped smiling at the people in front of him. Near the end of the line stood a mother and her young daughter, who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. The little girl was hiding behind her mother's leg, peeking out with wide, curious eyes. She held a crumpled piece of drawing paper in her small hand. When it was their turn, the mother gently nudged the girl forward. Go ahead, sweetie, give it to him. The girl stepped up to the table. She was much shorter than him, and she had to crane her neck back to see his face. She stared at his cheek for a long moment. Kids are honest. They don't filter their thoughts. Does it hurt? She asked innocently, her voice piping up in the quiet shop. Keanu chuckled, a warm, deep sound that seemed to vibrate through the table. He leaned his elbows on the metal surface and brought his face down to her level. A little bit, he confessed. But I'm okay. I'm tough. Did she mean to be mean? Keanu shook his head slowly. No, she was just very sad. Sometimes when people are very sad, they get confused and make mistakes. We have to forgive them. The girl seemed to think about this for a second, processing this heavy piece of wisdom. Then she thrust her drawing forward. I drew you on a motorcycle, she announced proudly. Keanu took the drawing with both hands. It was a colorful scribble of a stick figure with long hair on a bike, with wheels that looked like squares. It was perfect. Whoa, he said, his eyes lighting up. This is amazing. Is this me? Uh-huh. I'm putting this right here, Keanu said, placing the drawing carefully next to his water bottle, in plain sight. Thank you. The mother, who had been watching with tears in her eyes, mouthed a thank you to him and guided her daughter away. The little girl walked back to the crowd with a skip in her step, proud that she had helped the man with the hurt cheek. Finally, the last person in the line stepped up. After that, the store manager, a kind woman with graying hair, walked over to the table. She didn't have a book. She just placed a hand on the table and looked at him with a mixture of exhaustion and deep admiration. I think that's everyone, Keanu, she said quietly. We can close up the line now. Keanu let out a long breath and dropped the pen. It rolled slightly on the table. He rubbed his hands over his face, smoothing down his skin, and for a moment, he looked incredibly tired. But then he looked up at the manager and smiled. Thank you, he said. Thank you for having me. And thank you for, earlier, with the lady, for being patient. She needed it, the manager replied, and you handled it better than anyone else would have. Keanu stood up. The crowd that had been lingering, hoping for one last look or a photo, began to disperse. No one swarmed him. No one pushed past the barriers. They just watched him go, It was as if they all collectively agreed that this man had given enough of himself today. He deserved to just walk to his car. He gathered his things, the few remaining books, his drawing of the square-wheel motorcycle, and his jacket. He didn't have an entourage of bodyguards sweeping him out. It was just him and the store staff walking toward the glass exit doors. He paused at the threshold and looked back into the shop. The sun was almost down now, and the store was bathed in twilight. He raised a hand in a simple wave to the staff and the few remaining fans. It wasn't a royal wave. It was just a guy saying, "See ya," as he pushed the glass exit bar and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The cool evening air hit him. A few people outside who hadn't been in the shop saw him and pointed, but they kept their distance. He got into a simple black car that was waiting at the curb as the taillights faded into the traffic of the city night. The people still inside the bookstore stood there for a moment. They looked at the empty metal table. They looked at the spot where the old woman had collapsed. They realized that they hadn't just witnessed a book signing that day. They had witnessed a masterclass in humanity. They came for the autograph of a movie star, but they left with a memory of how a man reacts when the world slaps him in the face. He didn't fight back. He didn't sue. He didn't make a scene. He just knelt down and helped a stranger up. Driving home that night, the people who were there would tell their friends and family the story. They wouldn't focus on the violence of the slap. They would focus on the grace that followed. And in a world that often feels divided and angry, that story would become a small beacon of hope, a reminder that kindness is the strongest thing you can offer, even when it hurts. The bookstore manager walked over to the table to turn off the lamp. She saw the glass of water still sitting there, condensation dripping onto the metal. She smiled, shook her head, and flipped the switch. The store went dark, but the light of the afternoon remained bright in the minds of everyone who had been there to see it.